Greetings. Welcome to Political Science 101. My name is Jeff, and you needn't be concerned with my last name because I hope that you don't make a habit of using it. My name is Jeff. I encourage you to address me by my name because, after all, that is, in fact, what I'm called. So today's interesting, not only because we are communicating, or I rather am communicating to you via virtual technology, uh, but also because we don't have the benefit of a proper classroom and the proper academic accoutrements, which I typically cannot do without. So I don't have slides for you guys because I don't have the means to demonstrate those slides in the visual form or interact with them, I should say. Nor do I really have much of anything. I'm rather, hopefully, aptly situated here in this rather pensive and somewhat ostentatious backdrop. These are actually the environs of my dad's home office. No, for the record, I don't still live at home, although I happen to find myself in my parents' house right now. But that's a long story, and we'll get into that later on. So today is going to be an interesting day, and I'm going to just real quickly here see exactly how much tether I got here. And okay, I'm off camera right now, so I got to be careful not to be too ecstatic in my movements here. But well, today's a good day, all right, and why is this a good day? Because this is my attempt to introduce you to a topic and a subject which is very near and dear to my heart, and hopefully after the course of the 16 weeks that are ahead of us, will be nearer and more dear to your heart than it is actually right now. Political science. So here's what we're not going to do today, all right? What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to waste a lot of time setting up the perfunctory sort of formatting expectations of the class, the syllabus, going through the actual grading rubric, and interpreting the mechanisms as they govern how we're actually going to go about learning this material, because I think that that is something that lends itself much more readily and much more easily to a dynamic interchange between you and I interpersonally in class, physically in the person, in the flesh, so to speak. So that's something that we will relegate to another day, another time, probably the first, let's see, the Tuesday of the second week of class this semester, because I think that's when I aspire to see you all. Now, if you're wondering what the hell is going on here, why am I watching a YouTube video of this guy in this rather silly looking Hawaii 5 themed t-shirt and this hat that he must have misappropriated from Indiana Jones here, doing my best Indiana Jones interpretation, and I know I'm failing at it very conspicuously, but there you have it. What's going on here? Well, you probably didn't see or read the email that I sent out to you, and I sent out an email, I don't know, well, I think today's Friday, and I sent out an email describing precisely what is going on and precisely why it is we have to relegate ourselves to this format, because the situation is such that this is really the only viable option we have. So there you have it. So going back to what I'm not going to do today, all right? So I'm not going to spend or squander the precious time that you and I have together on going through and apprising you of all the various details of what this semester is actually going to look like, okay? I'm not going to get into the actual formatting of the class, nor am I really going to get too deep into the substance of the class either, because we just don't have the time for that. What I'm going to try to do, okay, and this remains to be seen whether or not we can I can actually achieve this, but what I'm going to aspire to do today for you is to give you a brief a brief preface, an introduction to the topic of political science, and to enumerate for you the various reasons why I think it is incumbent upon all of us as diligent and scrupulous and conscientious American citizens to do our utmost to understand the political system within which we must operate. Now, that may seem like a tall order. That might seem like a rather ostentatious aspiration for us to do all that, especially in the course of the meager hour and 15 minutes or whatever it is we got together here today. But I assure you that I'm going to do my utmost to get through it, okay? So, and please, I'm going to go ahead and just preemptively apologize if I don't really have my flow down here and I'm uncoordinated in terms of the choreography of this, because I've actually, this is the first time I've attempted to do a video per se. I've done online courses before. I usually have the headphones on, the headset on, and I got the microphone I'm talking into. But this is the first time I'm actually doing this via a full video and audio recording, and it's actually rather disconcerting and highly unusual for me, because you guys don't know this because you can't see this, but I'm actually looking not at a camera, but I'm looking at the screen of a laptop that I got propped up against a piece of furniture, because that's the only way I could really rig it. So it looks convoluted, it looks ridiculous, and it looks even more ridiculous because I'm seeing myself on a screen, which I hate seeing myself. So I'm probably going to be looking off into the distance, and I'm not stoned or distracted. It's just that I don't like having to look at myself on the screen. So, anyways, that's that. Okay. So why study political science? I'm going to get more into this on the first day of interpersonal interaction, because again, this is something that I really do think needs to be expressed in the context of a direct personal exchange. But suffice it to say, I think there are several reasons why it's important for us to understand what we refer to somewhat euphemistically as political science, because in my opinion, politics isn't so much a science, it's more of an art. I guess you could say it's a little bit of science and art, but science implies a certain measure of exactitude. And I don't think there's a great deal of exactness in politics. Politics is like law. It's a million thousand shades of gray, like that rather stupid movie that hopefully none of you have watched, or if you watched, you didn't like it too much because it was horrible. But to each their own. Now, why do I say politics is like a million shades of gray? Well, because politics is the art, in my estimation, right? And this is my own personal definition, so it may seem a bit contrived, and it may not resonate with your understanding of what politics actually should be or what it actually is. But because I have the prerogative of teaching this illustrious class, I guess I also have the prerogative of setting out some definitional criteria here. So, in my personal estimation, okay, what is the essence of politics? What is the essence of the political process? Well, different philosophers have defined it in different ways, but I think one way of understanding it is through the reading of a very brilliant political philosopher, Niccolò Machiavelli. And Machiavelli was correct me if I'm wrong, and I may have to correct myself or amend this video retrospectively, but I think he was a 17th century Italian philosopher. He may have been in the 16th century. In fact, now I think of it, he was 16th century, because he was helping out the families that they talk about in Romeo and Juliet, not the Capulets, but a version of them. It may have been Genoa, I can't remember, but regardless, Machiavelli was a brilliant political philosopher, and he essentially went through many different iterations of attempting to understand not just the political process, but also attempting to understand how it was you, as the reader and the consumer of the philosophical treatise that he wrote, you could understand how better to manipulate and deceive people to accrue a unilateral advantage unto yourself. Now, that's something that many of us look at as being devious and deceptive and mendacious and ignoble and dishonorable. But I'll tell you something. If you look at the political process here in the United States in the 21st century, and indeed before, you will find that those sorts of qualities, a disregard for truth, an unconcern for honesty, a contempt oftentimes for the facts as we understand them and as we come to know them, and a capacity to misconstrue and to contrive and do finesse the facts in such a way so as to enhance the viability of your own political position. If you have those qualities and you also happen to be somebody who is rhetorically gifted and somebody who's quite eloquent and somebody who's quite forceful and somebody who is more than slightly charismatic, well, if you have those qualities and in great abundance, especially the more the better, then you tend to have the qualities that will predispose you to success in the context of the American political system. Now, this isn't just much of what I'm saying here, right, can be extrapolated and extended and expanded beyond just the narrow confines of how the United States operates in terms of our political system. You could say, well, this is true of a lot of other systems. This is true of any system which relies upon a fundamental democratic process. And people think they hear about democracy and they think, yeah, that's a good thing. We like democracy. Maybe we don't like Democrats. We like democracy, and democracy is a good thing for us because it's really all we've known. And you tend to get acclimated to a system that you become familiar with, and you become it ingratiates itself to you over the course of time, precisely because it's a system that has, for the most part, worked out in most instances. Now, just because democracy has worked for us for as long as it has doesn't necessarily mean that it's infallible. It doesn't mean that the democratic process is beyond indictment, right? Or beyond the purview of criticism. In fact, one of the things that I very strenuously urge you to do, and one of the things that I'm going to try to do for you, is to critique and criticize the democratic system. I guess from the inside out, but also from the outside in. Looking at it in terms of how the system works from the interior mechanisms that actually propel the system in the way that it works, and ascertaining and identifying which of those mechanisms is flawed and anticipating how those flaws might actually play out in the real world, and then looking at it from without in the sense that we're going to do a comparative analysis of the democratic features of the Republican system that serves as our political foundation here, our governmental foundation here in this country. And we're going to contrast it with other systems, and we're going to try to evaluate whether or not it actually is as viable and utilitarian as everybody seems to assume that it is. So that is one of my objectives in this class. But going back to what I think politics really is, okay, and going back to the somewhat oblique reference that I made to Machiavelli. Machiavelli is talking about how to essentially get people to do what you want, okay? Without them understanding that they're necessarily doing you a favor, right? Well, they think that they're doing something good for themselves. Now, I think in essence that is in terms of its structure, in terms of the way that formula operates and how it applies to people generally, I think that's a very good way of conceptualizing the form and the function and the spirit and the mandate of politics in general. To how to get people, how to through either deception or some other devious machinations, or just by being honest and being charismatic and being polite. But either way, the method and the mechanism is so important. It's what you aspire to do, right? The ends justify the means, okay? And in the ends in the context of a political system is or ought to be, as far as I'm concerned, and you can beg to differ if you like, right? But as far as I'm concerned, it's about getting people to do what you want, right? To vote for you, to endorse this amendment that you're proposing, okay? To subsidize your campaign, right? To go out there and to join you in your repudiations of your opponent, right? Fill in the blank, right? I mean, there's a million different things you could say, right? But that's essentially what I think about when somebody asks me, if any of you ask, and hopefully this is a thought that you pondered before you sat here and opened up this video. But when they ask me, what essentially, what is politics? What is it really? Is it reducible? I would say, yeah, it is. It's a reducible phenomenon, and that's what I would reduce it down to. Okay, so why should I study politics? Why do I care? Why should I bother listening to this rather obnoxiously loud guy who has very poor choreography skills in a really bad Hawaiian t-shirt and the stupid fedora. Why should I listen to this guy? Well, first of all, because your success in this class, academically speaking, is going to be contingent upon you assimilating yourself to the things I'm saying. So hopefully that's some inspiration for you to actually pay attention. But if that's insufficient, right? If you say, I don't care. I'm gaming for an F in this class, so I don't really need to listen to you. All right, fair enough. Good luck with that. I would say this, all right, for those of you who are unconcerned about, well, I can't assume that any of you are unconcerned about the grade. I think most of you probably are mostly concerned about the grade. But in addition to that, right, why is it important to understand the political system here in these United States? Well, for one thing, it helps, I believe, it helps you become a better citizen. It helps you become a more informed consumer of information, political information, as it emanates from the two competing political parties in our system, which is essentially a two-party system. It's bifurcated. And by being a more informed consumer of information, you can make decisions that are predicated not so much on emotions, but decisions that are more a function of an analytical process which enables you to carefully and scrupulously adjudicate and differentiate between the various competing propositions in a way that resolves that in so that it is intelligible and sensible and rational and based on a true understanding of the facts as you see them, right? Now, that may sound like a lot to aspire to inculcate in you, but I think it's something that we should try to do, okay? Because one of the problems with democracy, one of the problems with any system that relies primarily upon the will of the people is that it's only as good as the people are at making decisions. And if you have a people, if you have a population that is prone to giving air to all manner of ideas that aren't properly vetted and merely following those ideas without actually critiquing them properly because they sound good or because the person who's expressing them is a very forceful and compelling speaker, well, that's a bad situation because people aren't relying upon their reason to inform the decisions that they are making on behalf of not just themselves but the people, society collectively as a whole. So I think that the old expression the sum is or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts is certainly true, but I think it's also important that the constituent parts upon which the whole or the sum is based need to be working in a way that is proper and intelligible and makes sense. And the more sense you can make of the political system, the more the more informed you will be as you consume the information that comes from it. So that's something that I think we need to strive to work on. All right. Now, why else is it important to understand the science or the art of politics? Because as I said, I think it's really more of an art than it is a science. If it's anything, it's an art. Why else is it important? Well, I would say because it enhances your understanding of the civic virtues which all informed and conscientious citizens ought to be concerned with. Now, what does it mean when I say civic virtue? Well, civic virtue essentially means being a good, upstanding citizen who is well informed about the laws, who understands his or her place within the greater framework of the government, and who is able to exercise his fundamental rights in a way that shows discretion and good judgment. Now, not a lot of people actually live up to that aspiration, okay? Because most people don't really care about these things and they tend to vote impulsively and they tend to be very impetuous and they tend not to think things through very carefully because they probably never took a political science class, or if they did, they didn't pay attention or take good notes. And so one of the things that I hope to do is make you a better citizen by virtue of what it is you're going to be exposed to in the context and the confines of this class. Now, I'm not just saying this because it sounds good and because it may entice and inspire you and motivate you to actually pay more close attention to what it is that's going on in the context of this class, but I'm also saying it because I really truly believe it. Okay, so what are we going to be doing in this class? Well, we're going to be talking about many different things. I think that political science is what I refer to as an interdisciplinary subject. Okay, interdisciplinary subject in the sense that it relies and incorporates other disciplines, other subjects, other areas of academic scholarship and study. It incorporates these other areas because by necessity it relies upon other disciplines to actually, well, for you as a student of political science, you necessarily rely upon other disciplines so as to have a more informed and edifying understanding of what the political system actually entails. Now, let me explore that a little bit further because that may seem slightly abstract and a little bit too esoteric. But if you think about the political process, all right, if you think about the structure of the government, you think about the Constitution and how the Constitution evolved as a document, you can't understand either of those things without placing them in both their proper philosophical context, right? And secondly, I would say their proper historical context, right? Just like you cannot understand the evolution of the French Revolution, okay, without being able to understand the philosophical ideas that gave impetus to the revolutionary action of the Jacobins and the followers of Robespierre and eventually Napoleon and all the other various forms which revolutionary sentiment in France took at that time. You can't understand any of those things, right? Unless you understand the ideas which upon which those actions were inspired or based. Now, similarly, I think that it's true to say that you can't really understand the constitutional framework which serves as the basic foundation for this country unless you can understand the historical evolutions which gave rise to its current form. So, what I'm saying is that you can't really truly understand politics or political science or the art of politics. I should be careful with this nomenclature here. You can't really understand any of that unless you understand from whence it came. Where did it come from, and how did it get to where it is today? Right? How did it come to be? That's an important question. Right? Many people, many citizens, many politicians here in this country believe that the Constitution is a document that should remain in its absolute unadulterated form as it was originally codified and promulgated over 240 some odd years ago, right? Now other people say, well, you know what? No, the Constitution is actually an evolving document, right? It's something that allows for manipulation and evolution and adaptation, and we should look at it through the context of what is happening right now in the contemporary world. Now, you can't really properly delineate or understand those two positions unless you understand the historical framework upon which the Constitution was created, or within which the Constitution was created, and the ideas, the philosophical ideas which inspired much of what was actually written in that foundational document. So that's why I say it's important to understand and to co-opt and to embrace these other disciplines because we rely upon them just as they rely upon us. So it's an interrelationship that I think is very important for us to understand and for us to embrace in this class. Now, I think that the time for studying the political system here in this country is very opportune and has never been as propitious as it is at this particular juncture and at this particular moment in time. Now, I say that for a number of reasons. I say that first of all, not merely because we're in the midst of an election cycle and we're coming closer and closer to November with each passing day. That's obviously a critical and influential factor. But I think more so than that is out of consideration for the fact that the electoral process, as it stands right now in 2020, in August of 2020, is being subjected to forces which have metastasized around, coalesced around the two opposing parties, but which are much more prominent and visceral and more vicious, I would say, than they have been in any other election in recent history. And if you look at the support for the president, if you look at the support for the opposition to the president, you will see that many people are extremely animated by the thinking and the ideas that are associated with these two opposing ideological positions. And it's very much important for any one of us, right, regardless of your partisan affiliation, regardless of your political predilections, regardless of how you happen to think about the situation, either economically or militarily or strategically or geopolitically, regardless of your loyalties, it's incumbent upon all of us to understand this present political situation in a way that allows for us to look at it and compare it with the evolution of the political process so that we can have some framework and we have some context to better interpret what's actually happening. Because I think a lot of people are looking at the situation right now and they're anticipating that this is going to be very chaotic, it may be very violent, it may be unprecedented in terms of what we actually see in terms of the outcome in November. And they're saying this because we're dealing with a system that obviously, I think, this particular situation reveals some of the flaws that are very endemic to the political process. Now, just because the democratic system is flawed doesn't mean that it's a bad system. If you look at the criminal justice system here in the United States, nobody would say that it is a perfect system. Nobody would say that justice is truly blind. Okay, that's a great thing to believe in. Okay, but it's an idealistic thing to believe in, and it's not very consistent with the facts as they are on the ground. Now, likewise, I would think that many people would look at the political system here in the United States and they'd say, yeah, you know what? There's a lot wrong with this system. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of undue influence. Okay, you have lobbying special interest groups there in Washington, and they can buy political votes. They can buy political influence. And yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of that. Money makes the world go around, as we all know, right? And that's true in business. It's true in politics. It's true everywhere, right? So there's a lot that is flawed with respect to this system, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad system. All right. All that means is that there are imperfections which we can work upon restructuring and reconstituting in such a way so as to improve upon whatever deficiencies exist. Now, it also, I think the other thing that is important to bear in mind in our assessment of the viability of the American political system is not just looking at this in a vacuum in isolation, right? You gotta ask yourself the question, okay? I think this is a question that all aspiring American citizens ought to ask themselves. Whether you're an American citizen by birth, okay, by the time you reach the age of reason, you should ask this question. And certainly if you're aspiring to become an American citizen through the process of naturalization, you should also aspire to ask and answer this question. But the question that you really ought to ask yourself, right, is not just not what my country can do for me, but what I can do for my country. That's one question. But how is this system better than? How is the government system that we have here in the United States? How is this system better than the other systems that exist around the world at this time? Okay, so I think the dispositive question, the question that really elucidates the truth of our system and the value that it has, is not to say, is it perfect? Is it the best? Okay, well maybe that's something else, right? But it's not to say is it perfect, right? Or to focus on the various flaws that exist certainly within it, but it's to ask yourself the question, well, in comparison to other systems around the world, right? How well does the political process here in the United States work? Now, I think some could say, well, you know what, it sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, it doesn't always work because there's gerrymandering and there's rigging and there's vote buying and there's all sorts of convolutions and sleight of hand going on behind the scenes. And yes, a lot of that is certainly true. Okay, because that is inherent and endemic to, inextricably associated with the way in which the political process works in this country, no doubt. Okay, but I would say to you this, I would propose this: is it also not the case that when you go around and you look at other systems that are similarly situated to ours, or indeed systems that are very, very vastly different than ours, is it not the case that corruption and the machinations of devious aspiring politicians and the undue influence of lobbyist groups and special interests? Is it not the case that those sorts of things exist in more or less every system, every organized political system that you see, not just in the contemporary world, but going back through history since time immemorial? And I would submit to you that those features are features that are not so much a product or a function of the political system here in the United States, but they are features that are inextricably associated with human nature. So one of the aspects of this class that I'm attempting to allude to here is that it's not just about the way in which the system works, but it's also asking ourselves the question, collectively, us asking ourselves the question, why does this system work the way that it does? Okay. Now, why is a very philosophical question. Okay. And what is the function of philosophy in relation to politics? Well, I would say that the function of philosophy in relation to politics is to better inform our understanding of how the political systems that we use and rely upon came to exist in the present form that they take. That's one understanding of it, right? The other, I think there's multiple other interpretations of philosophy in relation to politics, but I think that's one. The other way that I think politics or philosophy modulates our interpretation of politics is to say, why exactly is it we do the things that we do, and why do we do what we do and the way that we do it? Uh, that's a question for philosophers. All right, people who take political science classes often have an inclination or a predisposition towards philosophy. And some of you, I don't know if any of you, if this is true of any of you who are listening to this particular video, but some of you may actually have had the benefit of a philosophy course, all right, or a course in proper logical training before you actually embarked upon this adventure, as it is. That's good because much of the way in which we actually interpret and understand not just the art of politics, but also the way in which the government is structured and how it actually operates in relation to the various branches that comprise the government, that relies upon a very strong analytical framework. Okay, and one of the classes, one of the disciplines rather, that is really strongly associated with the study of politics is the study of law. And the more you delve into the political process, the more you really appreciate the fact that you can't really understand the political system here in the United States. You can't really use it in a way that allows for you to accrue a personal tactical advantage if you're an aspiring politician. You can't really manipulate that system in a way that gives you that advantage unless you understand the law. Now, the law is to politics as the rules are to the game, okay? Because ostensibly, anyways, at least in theory, whether or not this is actually true in fact depends on the circumstances, but in theory, all political actors in our system, whether they're the legislature, whether they're the executive, whether they're the judiciary, right? These branches and the individuals who comprise these various branches, they all have to play by the same rules of the game, okay? Now, one of the great things about our country is that everybody knows what those rules are, right? And those rules have existed for a very long time, okay? And if you want to know what those rules are, you go to the playbook, right? You go to the rule book, right? And what's the rule book for the political system here in the United States? Well, it's this little thing called the U.S. Constitution, okay? Much of what we're going to be talking about in this class is going to pertain to and co-opt elements from the Constitution. And the Constitution is, I would submit, by definition, it is, I think, a priori, you must assume that it must be an evolving document because it is subject to amendments. Now, that doesn't mean that you can go ahead and easily just tear pages out of the Constitution and replace them with something else. You can't do that. We can't do that very easily. And we're going to talk about the mechanisms that exist that are built into the system that allow for adulterations and amendments and modifications of the extant constitutional charter and the codifications that are included within it. We're going to talk about that, okay? But understand that it's not easy to go in and to just start changing the rules of the game. And I submit that that's actually a good thing. Okay? Now, even though this class is ostensibly going to concern itself mostly with the United States, that doesn't mean that we're going to exclusively concern ourselves with the politics and the history and the philosophy that gave rise to the political system here in the United States. We're going to do a lot of that, okay? That's going to be the bulk and the substance of what we're going to talk about, right? But you cannot, again, going back to what I said about the relationship between politics and philosophy and history, you can't understand the current situation here in this country, or indeed you can't understand the situation over the last however many decades, right? Unless you have something to compare it to, okay? And so this isn't just going to be a comparative class in the sense that we're comparing politics or the evolution of the political ideas that we're talking about with the philosophy that gave rise to those ideas. Yes, we're going to be talking about that, and in a way that's comparative. But this is also going to be a comparative class in the sense that we are comparing the political system here in the United States, the Republican system that we have, okay, this federal republic that we have here, we're going to be comparing that to other republics. One of the great analogies that I like to use, and one of the great analogies that has been seized upon in the context of popular culture, is the analogy between ancient Rome, reaching back to hallowed antiquity, 2,000 years ago, to the ancient Roman Republic. Because before Rome was an empire, it was a republic. Now, how is that in any way going to help us elucidate understanding of the contemporary situation here in the United States? Well, I would submit that it is a bit of a cliche, but I think it's also axiomatic to say that history repeats itself. Do political systems, the way in which they are created, the way in which they establish themselves, the various convolutions that they go through in the course of their striving to perfect themselves, do political systems go through changes? Do they go through cycles? Do they go through a process that we can look at and we can say that this is similar and this is consistent and this is something that has reappeared before throughout the course of history? I would submit that the answer to that, most of what I just asked there, is yeah, yes. Okay, yeah. Political structures, political systems, the foundations upon which a government is based, these things do go through certain discrete changes. Now, I would submit that what you have to look at when you anticipate how those changes are going to play out and what exactly they're going to entail for you and I as citizens of the United States, the way you got to look at that is you got to look at other systems that have existed before us that are kind of similar to us, right? And you say, okay, what happened with the French Republic, the first French Republic, right? What gave rise to the first French Republic? Well, there was this thing called the French Revolution. There were all sorts of radical ideas that were espoused by the proponents of the revolution, and the ideas that inspired and eventuated in the rise of the First Republic were absolutely essential to being able to understand how that form of government came to existence. Right now, that is there's a very, very strong parallel between that process in France, right around the same time as uh, George Washington was over there in Valley Forge fighting the Redcoats, and they were pronouncing from the bell towers there in Boston that the Redcoats were coming. Right around the same time, contemporaneous with our fight for independence against the British, there was this thing called the French Revolution. And it is important to study the connections because they really are strong and I think undeniable between the French Revolution and the American Revolution, right? Because these were both revolutionary processes which resulted in the promulgation of a republican democratic system. Okay, now the similarities don't end there; they continue on, but I'm not going to get into that right now because this is supposed to be an introduction to this class, and I don't want to get too distracted. So the point here, one of the points here, and there's many points here, but one of the points here is that to understand our contemporary political process, to understand the contemporary situation here in terms of how the government actually works in these United States, is to also, by implication, understand how other similarly situated political systems work, right? And what gave rise to the ideas which were used by the people who founded that political system and authored its foundational charter. Those things are all important and they're interrelated. So I think this is something that is really incumbent upon us to focus on, to learn, to understand, to respect, and to appreciate. And I'm sorry for the change of venue here, but I'm getting tired of walking around this room because I feel like a caged animal and I only have about 10 feet of walking space. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to sit in this chair. And what I want you guys to do is leave any critical feedback that you may feel inspired to leave for me, if you so have the inclination and you have the time, which hopefully you do, because I want to try to improve upon the efficacy of my delivery. And I realize there are many innumerable faults and flaws with respect to how I'm actually conducting myself and comporting myself in the context of this video. I'm already dissatisfied with the way it's going. All right, the lighting is very poor in this. I don't have a proper academic background. I don't have a dry erase board. Those things are too expensive at Walmart, and I'm too cheap to buy it. And I don't have PowerPoint slides, and there's a whole other list of defects. But what I want you guys to do, because this is actually the first lecture in a series of what I think are probably going to be either 2 or 3 lectures. I think we're probably going to do the first 2 or 3 class periods just via this, whatever you want to call this, distance learning, remote, soliloquy monologue of Jeff. And I'm aspiring to upload this video on YouTube. We'll see how that goes. I'm no skilled hand at the use of YouTube, and I don't really know the idiosyncrasies of video editing. So that might be something that actually could be an extra credit opportunity for some of you who are actually more technically adept than myself. But suffice it to say, what I strongly encourage and honestly beseech you to do is to evaluate critically not just the content and the substance of what the hell it is I'm saying and I'm talking about here, but also the formatting and the choreography, if you will, and the aesthetics and all the other features that are associated with this particular presentation. Because I can't know what I need to do to improve upon my performance unless I know just how bad of a job I'm actually doing in the first place. So, going back to our subject, and the other thing I guess I should say, I don't know whether or not this makes me seem any more noble or perhaps brazen and audacious, but I'm going to try to do these videos just completely ad-libbed, spontaneously, extemporaneously, if you will, without notes, just on the fly, off the cuff. I can do that fairly easily with this video because this is just sort of an introduction to the subject matter, and I think anybody who knows anything about the political system here in this country can probably do that effectively, but it'll get more complicated as we go in further, we delve in further into the substance of this class, and we go down the rabbit hole together. But right now, suffice it to say, I think that this is something that I'm going to try to do. That way we maintain the pretense, or no, we establish actually and factually that we actually know what we're talking about. Okay. What else are we going to learn in this class? Well, I keep coming back to this point that you cannot understand politics without understanding philosophy. Now, some of you may be apprehensive about that statement. Some of you may think that everything that this guy has been saying so far is just, it's all such an abstraction, okay? It's very, very difficult to pin down anything that you've said in a way that actually is coherent and intelligible and sensible and really makes a lot of intuitive sense. All right, fair enough. Good point. If any of you were thinking of making that, right? But I would say this: the nature of politics is in and of itself, ipso facto, an abstraction. Okay, what do I mean by abstraction? Well, abstractions deal with ideas, okay, complex ideas that are sometimes difficult to interpret because of their oftentimes very convoluted nature. Now, philosophy is like that, okay? Philosophy asks questions that are very abstract, that are so highfalutin that many people don't see a point in studying philosophy. Well, I not only see a point in studying it, but I absolutely insist upon it, as you need to insist upon it as well, because without philosophy, you won't really be able to understand much of this class. Now, don't
don't feel any trepidation or anxiety when I make these kinds of statements about, oh, philosophy is important and it's strange and so therefore it should be scary. No, that's not the case. Philosophy essentially, I mean, I already defined politics for you in as good a way as I think I could, a fairly decent way. But I think we should try to understand what philosophy is. Philosophy is just the way we go about trying to understand why we do the things that we do and understanding the why behind human action and human beliefs and the systems um, which govern us and regulate our lives. I think that is a definition of philosophy. Now, you could have philosophy is a term just like politics that lends itself to varying interpretations and it's highly subjective in and of itself. But I think that philosophy is essentially a study of the intellectual cultivation of the mind. And how do we go about reaching certain conclusions? What is the process? All right. How do we get from an idea that I have in my head to a conclusion that is predicated on facts, reason, logic, and an intuitive understanding of the world around me? Well, that is a process, okay? Philosophy helps us understand and interpret that process, and it makes it more cogent and comprehensible and lucid and intelligible to us, at least we hope. So, what is exactly the function of philosophy in relation to the study of politics, the art of politics, as I keep saying? Well, if you think about politics, if you really think about the political process, you say to yourself, somebody at one point in time had to think to themselves that I need to establish some some ground rules. I need to establish the 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 basis upon which this political system is going to be created, and how do I go about doing that? So we could be talking about, for instance, the United States Constitution. Now, many of you may know this. The United States Constitution was authored by men who were very scholarly in their pursuits, who were very erudite in their quality, who were very learned and certainly trained philosophically as well as historically as well as legally. And so that document, that very important, very essential document, which gives us the inalienable rights, which many of us seem to take for granted, that we're going to talk about in this class, that document needs to be understood in the philosophical context which gave rise to its ideas, which the ideas that were later codified within the pages of that hallowed document. How is it that we understand the ideas which inspired those notions, which gave force to the laws which now govern our land? Well, again, you can't understand that unless you go back and you try to think of, well, what was it going on in the mind of Thomas Jefferson? What was going on in the mind of James Madison and Benjamin Franklin and all the other great illustrious signers of that great and hallowed document? What was going on in their minds, right? Why did they think the way they thought? Well, you have to look at what influenced them, okay? What influenced them personally, what influenced them ideologically, what influenced them in terms of their strongest political convictions. And that's the best way to actually reason your way to an informed conclusion as to why these guys wrote what they did and what actually inspired the thinking that they were thinking in their minds when they were writing what they were writing. I can't do that. None of us, rather, can do that. Not just me. None of us can do that unless we actually examine what the hell was going on in 1776, right? Around that period. Now, don't worry, okay? This is not going to be some brutally mundane lesson in history. It's not. All right. Just as I keep it saying to you that even though philosophy is important, it's something that first of all you can understand and easily assimilate yourself to, right? But second of all, right, you gotta take the good with the bad. Okay. So you take the political aspects of this class, right? Understanding the way in which the government is structured, understanding how the political process actually works. You take that, right, and you inform your understanding of that with a knowledge, a certain knowledge of history and a certain knowledge of philosophy. I don't know if there's another more clear and lucid way for me to really express that. So, the other point that I want to make is that I think the other value, the other utility, the intellectual utility that a careful study of the political process imbues in the scrupulous student is an appreciation for the dialectical process. The dialectical process. Okay. Now, what does it mean when you're engaged in dialectics? Dialectics, okay, is just a very fancy and somewhat complicated way of saying that there is an exchange of ideas that is constructive, that is evolving, and that is interdependent. So, for instance, I think this might be an anecdotal demonstration that will be helpful. When you and I sit down together in our physical class environment, which is going to look much less regal than this room that I'm presently situated in, when we sit down in that environment, I'm going to ask questions. And I'm going to hope and expect for answers. Whether I get them, I don't know. Whether I get satisfying answers, who the hell knows? But I'll hope for the best and I'll expect the worst and we'll be ready for anything. But the fact of the matter is that you can't understand politics unless you engage in this dialectical process. And many people who teach political science, especially 101, because this establishes the foundational rules of the game and how you proceed going forward, many instructors and professors and teachers and fellow educators of mine will insist upon something they refer to as the Socratic method. Now, I'm probably going to talk about this later on in what is technically going to be the introduction to this, well, the introduction to the syllabus and the other perfunctory matters of this class. But suffice it to say, the Socratic method entails a dialectical exchange between the instructor, yours truly, and the student. Now, why is that important, and what is the utility that you derive from that? Well, the way Socratic, some of you will probably know this, some of you have probably guessed at this, but the etymology of the word Socratic, right, the term, it takes its name from this guy, this ancient Greek philosopher by the name of Socrates. Now, Socrates may or may not have been a factual historical character. We don't know with a high degree of certitude. We can say more likely than not he was certainly, more likely than not, I can't say certainly, but more likely than not he was wandering the streets of 5th century Athens. And he was somebody who was regarded as a sophist, right? If you are a sophist, then you are engaged in sophistry, okay, which is an act. You engage in sophistry, right? Sophistry is speaking very eloquently, very, very well, articulating yourself in a very flowery and florid manner, but not necessarily imparting a lot of substantive wisdom. That's what Socrates was known for. But Socrates was also known for his pedagogical methodologies, right? Pedagogy is just the art of imparting knowledge. It's how you, the science of learning, essentially, right? And Socrates was a man who believed that the best way to imbue knowledge and inculcate information into the minds of your students is to engage directly with those students. It is a participatory, collaborative, and cooperative and dynamic exchange and interplay between teacher and student. Now, that's what I mean by dialectical, or that's one of the things that you could mean by dialectical, and that it's two-sided, okay? Now, I'm not going to ask or impose upon any of you that which I would find to be repugnant to my own personal sensibilities. And because when I was a young lad many years ago as an undergraduate at Michigan State University studying criminal justice among other things, I always hated classes whereby the instructor would just randomly call upon people without any warning or expectation, and you couldn't anticipate whether or not your number was going to be up next. I hated that. I despised that. And I still do. And because I find that to be so loathsome, I am not going to impose upon you that which I find to be contemptible. That's just another iteration of the golden rule, if you've been paying attention to your theology lessons. But you probably haven't, because that's not a part of the curriculum. So what I'm saying here is that even though Socrates really did believe that it was absolutely essential and critical and dispositive for people to rely upon this exchange to really understand things. I'm not going to demand that any of you actually answer any of the questions that I throw out there. Now, it would make things a hell of a lot easier. It would make things flow more quickly, and I think it would be much more efficient if that were in fact the case. But because I abominate that myself, I'm not going to impose involuntary or mandatory participation on any of you in this class, even though I do think that that would be perhaps more conducive to furthering our collaborative interests. That being said, one of the things that this class is intended to condition in you is a healthy respect for debate. And oftentimes, some of the best debaters are, in fact, politicians. Now, why is that the case? Is that just a coincidence? Is that just a strange matter of happenstance? No, it's absolutely not. It has nothing, or very little to do with coincidence. Because most of the great politicians, right, and a lot of the not so great politicians, most of these people are, in fact, lawyers, and they trained in the law. And what do you do when you train in the law? Well, you read a lot of case law, and you try to interpret the common law, and you try to make sense of these things, and you try to reconcile precedents, and you do a whole lot of other things too. But one of the things that you do when you endeavor to learn the law is you learn how to formulate an argument so that you can be more effective at winning a debate, or at least more efficient at persuading people to see things the way that you perceive them. That is, in essence, going back to the point that I made, however long ago it was now, the essence of politics, right? And if you are somebody who's very, very clever and very, very good at effectively and cogently and lucidly articulating your point in a way that makes sure it resonates with your audience so that they see it the way you see it and they therefore believe the things that you believe in the way that you want them to believe it, well, hey, that's half the battle right there. The other half is just getting the money, okay? Because half of everything in this country is luck, right? And the other half, some would say fate, because that's actually the other side of that equation, but I would say money, okay? The almighty dollar, cash, hard, cold, greasy, nasty cash. That's what really makes the world go around, and it's certainly no different in Washington, and it's no different anywhere else in these United States either. So that's a lesson that you should assimilate yourself very quickly to. And if you learn nothing else from this first foray into our joint endeavor to understand the political process here in this country, well, at least you learn that. And that's always worth your money. Going back to this point, though, about conditioning you to think about things in a certain way, I think that political science, more so than almost any other class that you could think of, that you could conceivably take here at our college, is one of those courses that really does teach you not just what to think, right? I mean, a lot of classes teach you what to think, right? There's the substance of the class, right? You're going to learn this, that, and the other thing in the various weeks that comprise the semester as a whole. Okay, those are the topics that we're going to learn, right? Okay, every class does that, right? But this class is, in some ways, I would say exceptional, right? And unique in the sense that it doesn't teach you only what to think, right? It does teach you that, right? But more importantly, it teaches you how to think. Now, why is that so critical? Why is that of such greater value? Because I could sit here all the live long day on my YouTube channel or wherever this video eventually ends up at, and I could talk all about history and philosophy and the political system and the political process and the laws which govern our land. And that's all well and good. But at the end of the day, I feel as though I would be doing you a tremendous disservice. Because if I just give you that information, all I'm really giving you is data, miscellaneous factoids. And yes, some of this information might have greater utility than others of it, right? But at the end of the day, the most valuable thing that you can take away from this or any other academic experience is how to go about processing and interpreting information in a way that makes it more sensible and intelligible to you. That is something that is really worthy of learning. That is a noble pursuit, right? And why is that possessed of such great intellectual utility? Well, I would say because it's the same reason why lawyers, or why the legal profession is the new priesthood, as they call it. Because lawyers learn about everything. Anything that you could possibly think of. By definition, you have to be able to learn about anything because a client comes into your office and they say, hey, I had a slip and fall accident outside the Kmart down the street over there, right? Well, that's that's tort liability right there, right? Or they could come in there and they could say, well, you know what, that physician who operated on me, he was supposed to replace my heart valve. He installed an extra kidney, okay, in my body. Well, you got a medical malpractice suit, right? Or they could say, you know, that airplane that I was riding on, it had a faulty engine and it caused a catastrophic crash, and incidental to that crash, I suffered grievous harm, right? Well, then you have corporate malfeasance. The point that I'm trying to make here, though, is that lawyers have to be able to engage with many, many different subjects with equal alacrity and proficiency. It's not just about understanding the law, it's also about understanding and interpreting the facts that fit and match the law. Now, political science is inexorably associated with the study of the law. As I said before, we're going to be spending a hell of a lot of time learning about the U.S. Constitution in this class, right? Perhaps more time than you really hoped or expected to spend. But that's okay, because the Constitution, if you're going to spend time studying anything, right, it might as well be the Constitution, because it's something that repays your diligence and your study with interest. It's something that has utility. The study of the Constitution in and of itself confers upon you a greater appreciation for the laws of this land and a better understanding of the inner workings of those laws, so that you can use those laws to your own personal advantage. Not that I'm recommending that you go out there and usurp things or misappropriate things or use the law in a way that is nefarious or invidious or insidious. No, not at all. But I'm merely saying that those who are informed about the way in which the law operates are much more likely to know precisely the extent and the expanse of their rights, where their rights end and where the law begins to infringe upon those rights. Now, I see I'm coming up to an hour. And I believe ordinarily this class is a little bit over an hour, but you got to factor in the break period. I don't know how long that's going to be. So I'm gonna try to wrap things up here, and hopefully, in conclusion here, make some sense of the overarching ideas and the themes and the topics that I've endeavored to speak on thus far. So here's the takeaway, the quick and the dirty, if you will. A couple of things, right? I want you to know, first of all, the importance of the interdisciplinary approach to understanding political science, right? Or as I refer to it, as the art of politics, right? Because I really do think that politics is more like a canvas, right? You take a brush and you paint in broad strokes a tapestry upon this canvas, and you make it into a masterpiece. That is, in my estimation, evocative, allegorically anyways, evocative of what it means to be an effective politician. Not, I'm going to my chemistry laboratory today and I'm going to look through my electronic scanning microscope and evaluate the activities of microbial organisms. That doesn't really map on to politics, and that's why I keep on referring to it as an art. So the first point, again, is the interdependence and the interrelationship between politics, history, philosophy, and the law. That's point number one. And not just being able to simply recapitulate that verbatim at me, because that doesn't really tell me very much, but explain why that is the case in your own words, okay? That's the other thing, all right? And that, I guess, is a segue to my second point, which is an even more critical point, which is that politics, or understanding politics and understanding all the various topics that are associated with it, helps you to become a more informed consumer of information, because it enables you to engage dialectically with the facts on the ground, and indeed, even more so, dialectically with the arguments of whoever it is happens to be your antagonist at any given time. Now, it's not just about going out there and winning arguments and being smarter than people and thinking ahead of them and playing this game of intellectual chess and being able to defeat your opponents so succinctly and with such great alacrity. Yeah, that's great. It's very satisfying, right? But it's also about understanding that the search for truth, because that's essentially what the historical definition of philosophy was, right? The search for truth helps inform and edify our perspective as it relates to the most expedient political process that works for any one of us. Now, why is that the case? Okay, again, this is trying to elucidate. I'm trying to elucidate this point this point about the nexus between philosophy and politics here. Why is that the case? Well, if you think about this logically, you take it apart very systemically, you have to say to yourself, the best way to achieve or to promulgate, to establish a system, a political system that is the most just and the most perfectly conceived in terms of how effectively and how righteously it adjudicates matters on behalf of the citizens collectively. The best way to promulgate and create that system is to think about what essentially is the nature of justice, what essentially is the nature of living together in a society collectively with other human beings. What is it that makes us human? What is our human nature? What does our human nature require of us, of all of us together? Because those are very important questions. If you think about this in very rudimentary terms, in the crudest of terms, okay, political science, if you want to call it that, is just knowing how to create the foundations for a system of governance that will work effectively by maximizing the interests of the most amount of people. How about that? All right? That works for me. Hopefully it works for you too. Finally, I think that it is very critically important for us not to underestimate the importance of civic virtue. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about this in this class, and some of you may think that I'm just talking over your head or just talking to hear myself talk because I like to hear myself talk. And while that may be true, it's a secondary point. The fact of the matter is that civic virtue is very, very important right now. People who don't have a healthy respect for the political system within which they operate tend to be less judicious and less discriminating in terms of the decisions that they make when it comes to actually exercising their prerogative as citizens. And if in fact that is the case, then people may make erroneous decisions that are based on erroneous thinking or a thought process that is not guided and informed by logic. And I'm not here to sit here before you and to strive to be this infallible font of wisdom and philosophical knowledge so as to edify you to the extent that you become a better citizen and to therefore make more just and judicious decisions. No, not at all. I don't think that highly of myself. But what I do hope to do for you, as well as for me, is to help elucidate the way in which our political system works so that you can understand it better, you can comprehend it, and you can appreciate and respect it, and therefore engage more functionally with it. And if that's the only thing you take away from this class at the end of our 16 or 17 weeks together, then you know what, as far as I'm concerned, I've done my job. I've done my job. And I see my timer is coming up to 1 hour and 7 minutes, and I think that might actually surpass the YouTube video upload limits. Hopefully it doesn't, because otherwise this video isn't going to make much sense, if it makes any sense anyways. But there you have it, and assuming I can edit this, this will be the last thing that you see and hear from me. Assuming I can't edit this, you're going to see me get up from this chair and walk clumsily over to my laptop, which is recording me. But I don't really care. I'll probably leave that in just for the hell of it anyways. I hope you are still awake, and I hope that you'll like this video, because you know I'm real concerned about thumbs up. That's what makes my day. All right. No, actually, I don't give a damn about that. But hopefully this was somewhat edifying and not too painful. All right. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening. I'll see you around hopefully sooner rather than later.